Now here on BBC News, it's time for Talking Business.
Hello and welcome to Talking Business. Here's what's on the programme this week. Global food prices are on the up again. From fruit to meat, costs are rising. But why and what impact will President Trump's trade war have on what we pay for essentials? Trade deals and tariffs often focus on basics like rice, wheat and soybeans and even orange juice. But as confidence in the global economy falls, will we all end up paying more to eat? I'll discuss that with these two. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization's chief economist talks us through the costs and causes at a time of sticky inflation. And the boss of the restaurant giant SSP Group tells us what it means for thousands of bars, cafes and eateries all around the world. Plus, we'll hear from the boss of brewing giant Heineken about how he's navigating the global trade war and why removing alcohol from beer is pulling in a profit. Wherever you're watching, welcome to the show. Now, the cost of food is something all of us need to worry about. From America to Australia, from Chile to China, every corner of the world has, over the last few years, felt the impact of major global events like the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. They've felt that in the price of their weekly shop. And once again, prices are beginning to creep higher. The UN's food price index shows how costs hit a record high shortly after the war in Ukraine started, underlining its importance in exporting food to the rest of the world. And whilst prices then fell back, they're now 8.2% higher than they were a year ago. Now, partly it's because prices for basics have been volatile. Coffee and dairy have risen, whilst grain prices have fallen. The range of reasons include unusual weather and uncertainty around global trade. Now, the biggest impact is always on those with the least money. Nigeria, Kenya and Bangladesh are all countries where more than half of household spending goes on food, whereas in the US, UK and Switzerland, it's less than 10%. But food prices are a political issue too. This was Donald Trump on the campaign trail last year.
One of my top priorities will be to quickly defeat inflation. It'll also bring your grocery bill way down. I have more complaints on grocery. The word grocery, it's sort of simple word, but it sort of means like everything you eat. The stomach is speaking. It always does.
He's since conceded it's hard to bring things down once they're up. And that's been seen in the way inflation continues to be pushed up by higher food prices in the US and other parts of the world. And whilst consumers always want to spend less, on the other side are the farmers, whose income depends on what we pay for their produce, and whose work is essential to making sure there's enough food to go around. In December, the President of the European Commission announced a new trade deal with a group of South American countries that would expose EU farmers to greater competition.
This will create huge business opportunities. And to our farmers, we have heard you, listened to your concerns, and we are acting on them. This agreement includes robust safeguards to protect your livelihoods.
But it's the US that's the world's biggest food exporter. Its farmers could feel pain from other countries responding to President Trump's tariffs. At a time when the US is importing more food than ever, tariffs could make it harder for farmers elsewhere too, as this Californian vegetable farmer explains.
Any type of tariff or trade war, there's winners and losers. Concern on fertilizer price and some of our inputs, if those increase, that's going to put a damper on things. That's going to increase our cost. Products coming in that we compete with, yes, maybe that raises the market somewhat. But again, there's winners and losers, and to see how it all plays out, there's a lot of unknowns at this point in time.
So how might all this uncertainty play out, and why is the cost of some food going up whilst other prices go down? To explain that, I've been speaking to the chief economist of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. Maximo, Torero, Cullen, good to have you on the programme. And your report shows, doesn't it, that food prices have risen by 8.2% over the year, but that in itself hides some disparities. Just explain that for us.
So essentially, we have to be very careful when we refer to food prices, because one thing is the prices of the food that you consume, and those are still increasing. And there are several elements in addition to the food commodities that compose that price. For example, you need energy, you need other inputs to produce the food you buy in a supermarket. In the case of FAO, we also follow the commodity prices, and those are the core commodities like wheat, maize, corn. But for example, when you consume bread, the production of bread only have 2% of wheat in the production of bread. So we need to add all those other elements, which is including energy, that will increase potentially the prices. What we're observing today is that the commodity prices of wheat, maize, corn are stabilizing and going down and stable, but the prices of food still are not going down at the velocity we would like, and in some cases are increasing. The more poor the country you are, the less the transmission downward we are facing in terms of final food prices.
So things like coffee and sugar, they're going up in price, but at the same time, things like grain are coming down. Why that difference? What's driving that?
No, in the case of coffee, for example, the issue is different. Is that there are some climate issues that had affected some countries through different pests and diseases, but also production of, especially in Africa, which have restricted the supply of coffee. The same happened with cocoa. In the case of cereals, which we are talking of wheat, maize, and soybeans, we have seen that the supplies have been very stable in the last months and in the last years after the spike that happened during the COVID-19 and also the war in Ukraine. Now, why the supplies are stable? Because commodities are moving out of Ukraine and Russian Federation, but also other countries like Brazil, Argentina, and the US have been producing and have good supplies this year, which has assured that there is enough supplies.
Now, just as we get over some of those disruptions, the tariffs announced by President Trump could reshape the way that the world trades, particularly when it comes to things like food. What impact could they have?
Look, it's very early to assess because, as you well know, these issues changing every day. What we know in terms of tariffs overall is that there will be a welfare loss in the society as a whole, meaning that because of the increasing tariffs, the consumers will be bearing some of those costs that will be affecting countries. But still, we don't have clarity of what will happen. And there are multiple scenarios that could be happening. First, the tariff never become to a realization. If they become to a realization, it will depend on what will be the response of countries in which tariffs are imposed, if there will be an individual differentiated response, or if there will be an overall response.
Which countries are most vulnerable, do you think?
Look, the countries which will always be the most vulnerable, if these are issues specific to food, will be the import-dependent countries, no? And also, of course, we need to add to that component whatever happens with the currency. Because if those countries face exchange rate devaluations, then of course you will have the price effect plus the devaluation effect.
Now, aside from that major shock, climate change has the power to disrupt how we produce food. What impact could it have, and where might we see that impact?
Yeah, what we need to understand in terms of climate and extreme weather events, which we are observing today, is that we already have violated 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. There are 5 impacts of climate. One is extreme temperatures. The second one is excess of lack of water. The third one is climate variability of indicators, which will make more difficult for farmers to make decisions. The third is pests and diseases that will adapt to climate. And the fifth one is migration of human beings and migration of species. So those are the 5 dimensions. Now, which will be the most vulnerable countries? Of course, the poorest countries will be the most vulnerable. And the answer is simple, is because they have less capacity to be resilient to those changes. They have less income, they are more budget constrained, and they cannot respond earlier to those type of potential changes. And they don't have the information and the quality of institutions and insurance systems in place that will allow them to cope with those type of extremes.
Is technology the answer here? What role will that play in solving some of the challenges when it comes to food production?
Sure, technology could be a solution, of course. As I mentioned, climate will affect in 5 dimensions. Now, to cope with that, we need to increase resilience and how we can make the production of food, of farmers, more resilient. And that's where technology and science-based evidence will make a lot of sense because it will help us to use seeds and varieties which are more weather resistant. And of course, we need to find ways to facilitate trade because that will diversify the portfolio and will minimize the risk. So yes, technology will play a crucial role, but we need to look and the technology should be driven by science. And the major job is how we can make technology inclusive to avoid the poorest to be excluded from those technological advances.
And fundamentally, do you believe that the world has enough food to go around?
The world today has enough calories. But the world today doesn't have enough diversity of foods that we need to have. So in terms of availability of calories, we have. In terms of availability of what we call a healthy diet, which is diversity of food, we are still missing significant production. But that does not mean that we have enough access to food. So the major problem is the lack of access to food. So the food is produced, but it's not distributed evenly, And therefore, there is a significant amount of the population in the world that today doesn't have access to food, 733 million people, but also a significant amount of the population that don't have access to healthy diets. More than 2 billion people don't have access to healthy diets.
Maximo, Torero, it's really good to have you on the programme this week. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
It almost goes without saying that selling food is big business. Whether you're running a market stall, a supermarket or a restaurant, there's plenty of money to be made from feeding people. One company that feeds busy commuters and travellers is the UK-based SSP Group. It operates thousands of restaurants, bars and cafes in 37 countries, mainly in train stations and airports. I've been catching up with its chief executive about how the firm's dealing with rising prices, new tariffs and changing consumer demand. Patrick Coveney, welcome to Talking Business. It's good to have you here. And a lot of people will use your business without really knowing it. Just explain what it is you do.
Yeah, I mean, our company is called SSP, and we're the people who provide you with sandwiches, coffee, beer, wine, dinner, breakfast when you travel around the world. So we operate in 37 different countries, about 650 different airports or train stations, and we have about 3,500 different bars, restaurants, or convenience stores that will serve you your food when you're traveling.
And it's a captive market. People want a coffee, they want some breakfast before they get on that plane or on that train. But it is a difficult market to be in as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun place to be, first of all, right? Because huge numbers of people are going on their holiday, going to see family. And so, we're often serving customers, at a point where they're often at the beginning of a holiday. But it's logistically tricky, right? So, airports are busy. The supply chain into airports is often challenging. All of our staff have to be security cleared. And we are serving people at times of day that are pretty unusual for restaurants. So much of our business, for example, is early morning breakfast. So in that sense, it's a different kind of business to kind of core restaurant and hospitality businesses.
Talk to me about some of those logistics, because if you look at what's happening with the world economy right now, supply chains are more fragile, more vulnerable than ever before. That's before we even start talking about things like taxes and tariffs. How do you navigate that? How do you make sure that your supply chain is robust?
Well, I mean, the first thing that helps us is there continues to be good underlying growth in international travel, particularly air travel. So, we're different from some other parts of the retail and hospitality market in that we have access to quite predictable structural growth, which is good. But you're right, there are complexities in terms of how the business works in different parts across the world. The essence of how we try to tackle that is to deliver solutions locally. So our supply chains are local, our staffing is done locally. So the core of this business is great local solutions to meet the local needs of travelers.
We know that the cost of living is rising. We know that food inflation, the price of food has soared. We know that you're being asked to pay more and more to employ staff, be that minimum wages or additional taxes. There's so many challenges on your business, things like energy prices as well thrown into the mix. How do you navigate all that?
So about 3/4 of our business is in airports and about 1/4 is in rail stations. Most air travel now is leisure. When travelers are doing that, they typically have a bit more money to spend, and they want experiences that add to that holiday experience. So we don't quite have the same price sensitivity that you would see in other retail and hospitality environments, and that's obviously helpful for us. Now, we still have to make sure that we're delivering value for money, we're delivering convenience, we're delivering high quality service, and that helps us as we put together the propositions we prepare for that.
It feels like for all of us, prices have gone up. And as I said, for stuff like coffee, not only the raw materials, but then the energy to make it and the people to serve it, you sort of get hit on all sides. I mean, how do you adapt the business to cope with that?
So strategically, what we've done with the business as the business re-emerged after COVID is we've sought to position the business to where people are traveling. So our business is much bigger in the air channel now than it was 6 years ago. We've also seen a different or created a different geographic mix than before. So our business is bigger in America, it's bigger in Asia Pacific, it's bigger in India, It's bigger in the Middle East, in all cases materially, than it would have been 6 years ago. And relatively speaking, it's smaller in Europe. So what we've sought to do there is to put our capital, put our expertise, and in both instances to open more bars and restaurants and convenience stores in markets that are growing relative to markets that are flatter. In terms then of how we operate the business, we absolutely have to make sure that we are offering value for money. So, we try to do that in terms of how you put together the menu, the types of brands that we choose, the kind of loyalty programs otherwise that we run with.
And what do those shopping habits tell you about how that's changed? What are customers asking for now that's new, do you think?
So we're definitely seeing a greater share of our customers who are on some form of a leisure trip. People typically come to an airport earlier when they're going on their holidays than when they're going on business. So people are spending about half an hour more post-security before they head to their flight. So as a result, actually, the environment for bars and restaurants in airports is changing. And it's more focused on sit-down experiences before people fly, because people have more time to spend.
If we look at things like tariffs, for example, it's a big week for tariffs in the United States. What does that mean for your supply chain? What does it mean for getting what you need, be it people or materials, to the United States, given what we're seeing from the White House right now?
Just before COVID, in about 30 airports in North America, we now operate in almost 60. So the business has grown very, very strongly over the last 5 years there. But we have to be very conscious of the impact that tariffs could have on the cost of our ingredients. Somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of our sales go into our cost of goods, right? And so if we see more inflation, we'll have to mitigate that either through being more efficient in what we do, or in certain cases through pricing.
When you say, whether you're able to mitigate it by passing it on to consumers, how much can you pass on, do you think?
Well, I think our sense for the direct impact of tariffs is that it would be relatively modest on the food chain. But in some instances, that does require us to also raise prices to reflect rising input costs. And there are some instances where we've done that. But that, to be honest with you, Ben, that's the business, right? You are always going to see inflationary pressures, and you got to try and find a way of mitigating that. I think our business has a good track record of doing that in a way that tries to balance looking after travelers, but also ensuring that our business is able to earn a fair and decent and ideally growing return.
Patrick Coveney, good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thanks for being with us.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Ben.
Now, just like food, the drinks industry isn't immune from rising prices for its basic ingredients. Heineken is the world's second largest brewer, and while the drink set offers aren't perhaps strictly necessary, they are popular. The company reported profits of $1.3 billion last year. Now, the huge growth in alcohol-free options is helping the Dutch giant navigate a turbulent global economy. Our reporter Jonathan Josephs has been speaking to its boss.
Dolf van den Brink, welcome to Talking Business. The last year or so has been a fragile time for the global economy, yet you've managed to get your company back to growth. What's been the key to that?
Is staying true to our priorities, which is always about serving our consumers and customers the best we can, focus on our brands, focus on our breweries. The Heineken brand has been extraordinarily important at that, as well as the rest of our premium portfolio, as well as the 0.0 segment, which is having a lot of momentum at the time.
You bring me on to the next question. As you say, zero alcohol beer is a big part of your strategy now. I just wonder, what's driving that? What can you tell us about why that is doing so much better than the rest of the business, certainly in terms of how much it's growing?
Yeah, I think non-alcoholic beer is not new. It has been around for many decades, but there were always three problems. And we really changed that by the launch of Heineken 0.0 back in 2017. And we solved for the three problems. Due to a technological breakthrough, Heineken 0 tastes like real beer. It was the first 0.0 that really tasted like beer. Secondly, with the Heineken brand, it sends a very strong premium and quality signal. And thirdly, we really invested a lot in making 0.0 beer socially acceptable through our advertising and especially through our Formula One sponsorship platform.
How much is it to do with health concerns? Earlier this year, the US Surgeon General warned that alcohol was the third leading preventable cause of cancer, and we know that younger people are being more health conscious.
I think the wellness trend, the health trend is something that has been around for a long time. Right now we're seeing the social acceptability of 0.0 beers like Heineken 0.0 really going up and becoming relevant in many more occasions. I love to take a Heineken 0.0 with my lunch, for example, which is something I didn't used to do in the past.
Dolf, it's interesting you mentioned the social difficulties. How do you overcome that hurdle? Because you did some research with Oxford University earlier this year, a survey showing that people are reluctant to drink zero alcohol beer when they're with their friends. So how do you overcome that hurdle?
Yeah. This, together with taste and perception, that is the main barrier. By putting the Heineken brand, the largest, most premium brand in the world, behind 0.0, turning the whole Formula One platform, a sponsorship platform on 0.0, I think we're playing a major role in making it more socially acceptable. We dedicated 25% of our global marketing budget to the Heineken 0.0 variant, which was vastly over-investing because indeed we felt it was really important to switch consumer perceptions of non-alcoholic beer.
And how important is zero alcohol to your profitability, to your future as a company? What share of sales is it now, and where do you think it might be in 5 years' time, perhaps?
We believe this is going to be a major part of our business going forward. Today, zero alcohol beers is only around 3% of our portfolio, but it's growing year over year at 10% plus. We're seeing this now really becoming a global phenomenon, and as such, it's a huge strategic priority.
When it comes to those sports sponsorships, you're spending a huge amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars on Formula One, on Champions League football. How do you gauge the success of that? Because you have to sell an awful lot of beer to pay for that.
Yes, those kind of big sponsorships are indeed an expensive, endeavor. So it only really works if you're truly a global brand with global reach, serving hundreds of millions of consumers all over the world. So for us, it really works. And we felt actually using that sponsorship platform at the service of building and growing 0.0 beers globally was the right thing to do. And we believe it really is starting to pay off.
And is there a way you could measure that?
Yes, like with all marketing, it is not a complete exact science, but in this world where so much more of your marketing is digital, your ability to measure your return on investment has been going up relative to the past. So yes, indeed, we do feel we have the kind of analytical ability to justify those investments. Otherwise, we wouldn't do them, of course.
I want to talk about tariffs, Dolf. President Trump's trade war is perhaps the biggest cloud hanging over the global economy at the moment. What does it mean for a global company like Heineken selling in pretty much every country in the world?
Yes, of course. We like to say at Heineken, I have a green Heineken bottle. I don't have a crystal ball. So I don't know more than you. There's a lot of uncertainty and volatility, so that is what it is. But let me speak to our industry and our company. Beer is really a local for local business. In over 95% of our global volume is actually produced in a local brewery for a local market with local employees, mostly using local ingredients, serving local consumers. And the more local for local you are, the more kind of protected you are from disruptions in the global trading network.
Do you have any concerns, though, that if the global economy suffers, if consumers are less willing to spend, if they've got to spend more on other things, they'll have less money to spend on your beer, certainly in North America, which is obviously a big market for you?
Well, historically, beer has proven to be a relative resilient consumer category. Under different circumstances, people feel the need to come together and share a beer and have a moment of enjoyment.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but you make some of your beer in Mexico and send that over the border into the United States. So will these tariffs push up prices anywhere for you?
Yes, in general, pricing is something that we need to be balanced about. Of course, the last few years, triggered by a couple of years of very high inflation levels on input cost around the world, there has been a lot of pricing, and we need to make sure that we stay affordable for our consumers. And that's why also last year, but also this year, you see much more moderate pricing across our different markets.
Now, climate change, Dolf, that's a big area of concern and challenge for many businesses. And scientists have been warning that it means that the quality and the taste of the ingredients that are crucial to beer are changing. How do you overcome those challenges as a company where that is essential to what you do?
First and foremost, we try to do our part on addressing where we are having an impact on the environment. We really focus on decarbonization. I'm proud to say over the last 2 years only, we reduced our global carbon emissions by over 1/3. We're also really focusing on water usage and to really drive efficiency. But indeed, it's something that we do need to focus on developing more drought-resistant varietals of barley, for example.
Dolf van den Brink, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thanks, Jonathan, for having me.
That's all for this week. For the latest on the global economy, do check out the BBC News website and app. Thanks for watching. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Hello, staying dry for another week yet.